of Charlene's knee surgery and stuff, but he did send me an email, so depending on how far we get, I did print a couple copies so we can hear from Chief and stuff. It kind of just depends on how far we get, but Dr. Watson's gonna
Thanks,
lead us
Kathy.
off.
So, Kathy, Danny have promised, or made me promise, that not to wear you out before we even get to the meeting. So we're gonna take plenty of breaks. Deborah's brought snacks. It's gonna be very relaxed. What we really want is, again, your voice. A lot of discussion. We'll be moving from some individual reflection. So just so you can jot down, your notes, what you're thinking. You're gonna share that in small groups. And this isn't about trying to debate. This is the way I think, maybe clarify. Then we're gonna put the groups together. We'll talk about that, and we'll separate back out. We'll regroup just one time, and we'll see how far we get. So I'll go through that in just a second again. But thanks for being here. Thank you for those that, the Kansas Teacher of the Year weekend is usually one weekend. It's a Saturday and a Sunday. This year we could not get Salina on the Saturday, so we've split it. So this past weekend was Topeka and Kansas City. Appreciate you coming. As I told Beryl that heartwarming story of how she found one of the winners, actually, and brought him into education.
In the grocery store.
Yes, and he was so appreciative. He just kept telling me how wonderful she was and changed his life. And I said, well, how did you get here from Iowa? And he said, well, two important women in my life. My wife said I ought to come to Kansas, and Dr. Newt said you ought to be a teacher.
Wow.
And that combination made him Teacher of the Year for Topeka 501. So it was really fun. Danny did such a nice job, giving out the apples and stealing my chocolate cake. But we have record numbers. I was telling Kathy, we have record numbers this year of winners. By the time we're done this weekend, we will have acknowledged almost 140 Kansas teachers that have won at the local level. So thank you for that. It means so much to them, even though it's hard for them because they're never in front of adults and it's a little awkward for them. Yeah, they're like, I have to give a speech? Well, yes, yeah, you have to give a speech. So I'm just going to frame a few things for you, get out of your way, because this is really about all of you. There's two slides I always start with whenever I'm out presenting. This is always one, because it amazes me how I can be in the middle of Dennis Hirschberger territory, and Dennis is in the audience with me, and I'll say, right, Dennis, how many these are teachers, bus drivers. I mean, this isn't, I'm at the chamber. How many state board members are there? So I always start, you can't see it. How many are there? Most common answer is? 7, because of the local. They never guess an even number. Oh, 9.
Right.
Yeah, but they never guess an even number. And then how many can you name? So that's the pop quiz. Sometimes they will get whoever's in the audience. Sometimes. But not even always. And then I chastise them a little bit as a former history government teacher, is how do you not know your state board, your local board, your city commission, your county, because that's where most of the action happens. We think it happens in DC, but it really happens. So I always start with this and I talk about it in a variety of ways. Today, you're going to think, Debbie's going to think, I have a territory that serves approximately 50,000 Kansas students in an accredited school district. That's true for all of you. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. So that's why the territory for Betty's so small, and for Melanie is so small, because it's density. Not nearly as small for Kathy, but it's about the same number of students and families. So as you think about the work, and where we're headed is to establish some 2-year goals that you want to really focus on, that you really think is important, for the board. Because there's lots of things we can do.
Yes.
But the more we do here, the less we really get, what do we really want to get accomplished? And so I'm always going to phrase this thinking about a kid and a family. For the Teacher of the Year last weekend and this weekend, I get to do photo ops with them. And then I always ask them, who came with you? Often it's, if they're really young, my parents, maybe a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse. If they're a little older, my kids, and then, you know, the principal. And I always want to meet their family. And so, because I always want to think about who are we here to celebrate, and who never votes for you is a kid. Families do, but not kids. And yet, so you spend all of your time, as I do, with adult issues. And, bro, you know well, the reason I always love to be in high schools is because they're kind of like mini adults, but they haven't quite formulated all their thoughts. They're a little bit malleable that you can do that. So, 500,000 Kansas students in an accredited school. You do not oversee homeschools. You do not oversee non-accredited private. Will that change? I don't know. You know, who knows in the future? But in fact, we don't even know. They register with us. I can't tell you who's there. I don't know anything, and they may or may not take state assessments. There's no data on that. So I'm always smiled when someone says, you know, homeschoolers do worse than public school. There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence they do better. There's just no evidence, because that's not. So accredited school, that's what we're going to be talking about. So here's kind of the format of the retreat. And it's pretty simple. I'm giving you some brief information. I'll frame a couple of discussion questions for you. You're then going to, a little bit of time, I'm writing down my thoughts that I want to share, you know, with the group. Just I'm writing down whatever notes. Doesn't have to be perfect. This isn't, you know, we're going to record this out for you. And then your small group discussion is going to be, this is what I think about this question. This is what I'm thinking about the kids that I serve. This is, and all of you not only serve different parts of the state, you come at this job from a different perspective. You know, Betty comes at it not only as a parent, grandparent, but as a board member, a local board member. Well, that's different than how Connie comes at it, or Danny. And that's good, because your perspective is also then what makes this really strong.
Dr. Watson,
Yes,
can I ask you a really important question?
absolutely.
Can we turn the AC down a little bit? Or, I mean, up a little bit?
Freezing, it's chilly in here.
My bald head is starting to frost over, and Betty's.
Yeah.
I need mine.
There we go.
Covered in scar.
I have no idea if that worked, but I tried. I turned it up anyway. Okay, yeah. Rubber sand. Okay. That's collegiality right there. All right.
Teamwork.
Raleigh, did you get
That's
that?
bullying.
All right. So after, we're going to take as much time in the small group. I'm just going to kind of watch. When that conversation starts to lag, you're going to take a really short break, and then we're moving the tables together for you to have the same conversation with everyone. This is what we talked about. This is what I feel really strongly about. You know, Melanie, tell me what you feel really strongly about. Again, just so we're getting all of that information out. And then, so that's the large group, and we'll do some reporting out. So what you have in front of you is a pad for you to take notes. And then as we're thinking about the table, I'd ask for someone just record what everyone's saying, so we just get it on there. No voting though, Kathy. No voting. Kathy made me swear, no sticky note voting.
No sticky notes.
No sticky note voting. And then we're going to repeat that. You know, we'll take another break, and we're going to repeat that. Okay? All right. So this is the Kansas Constitution. At least it was as the time that they left the veto session. Okay? And it's really simple. Article 6, Section 2. This is the exact language. This is not anyone's interpretation. The legislature, so I always kind of, you know, I should have probably hidden some of it. Legislature shall provide for a state board. So they had to say, there's a state board. They've done that. Of education, which shall have general supervision of public schools, educational institutions, and the educational interest of the state. That's pretty broad. And all, the word all is in there. The educational interest of the state. And there's that except. And then you think, oh, it's a gotcha. Except, it's really, except those functions delegated by law of the state board of regents. And the only, in Article 6, the only thing that speaks to the legislature is that State board shall perform such other duties as may be provided by law. And the biggest, there's probably several chunks, but over the years, the biggest chunk that is not in the Constitution, I think, is pre-K. The legislature gave you a ton of it by statute, but not in the Constitution. The Constitution was K. It didn't mention pre-K. So the statutes that followed it. Here's what the legislature, and this is where we've been in court, Connie, years after years after years. The legislature shall make suitable provision for finance of the educational interest as determined by the state board. So what has happened on almost every court case is the state board says, we've got some ideas of what you should do, and the legislature says, I don't know if we like those or not, but here's what we're gonna fund. And then about every 20 years, we go to court. That's kind of been the cycle. That's, yeah, since the consolidation in 1965. So you have a lot of authority, as does a local board. But there are limitations to that, you know, as the local board has too. So this is a quote I've shared with you before, but I think it's instructive to the urgency of our work, or as Kathy would say, this is the pull your hair out moment. So how many effective schools, and I'm not going to use that in big caps, schools that really do well with all kids. So the quote is, how many effective schools would you have to see, personally have to see, to be persuaded of the educability of poor children? Schools that are educating poor kids as well as they're educating middle class and upper middle class. This goes on. If your answer is more than one, then I submit that you have reasons of your own for preferring to believe that pupil performance derives from who my family is, and not instead of school response to that background. Okay? This one eventually becomes, in big quotes, the effective school movement, because this researcher and others found there are some schools that do that. So here's the trigger I always look at when I'm in schools and talking to staff. If they don't believe that their work can change the trajectory of kids, then I will tell you what matters. Who is my mom and dad? Because if my mom and dad are heavily invested in education, this system works really well. It does. Oh yeah, there'll be some, but it works really well. It's when we don't have that, Betty oftentimes articulates that, we're not very good as a surrogate, but we try our best. Because there are some schools that say if you focus, if you're not here, if you focus, you can get the result that you want. And Liz Ansteiner, Kansas Teacher of the Year, says it's about demanding what kids don't want to give you every day. But having a connection that they know that you're going to be there with them, but you're not going to let them off the hook. Whether or not we will effectively teach the children of the poor is probably far more a matter of politics than that of social science, and this is as it should be, researcher says. Then he quotes, we can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do that. Whether or not we do it must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far. Now, what's interesting about that, this is a gentleman by the name of Ron Edmonds who passed away in 1983. This was a quote in the 1970s. Because he and a younger man named Ron Larry Lazat was doing research that said, why are there some schools in the United States that when you do matched they look like other schools, they do so remarkably better. And what they found was what they called effective school correlates. Get really focused, know exactly what you want to have the outcome to be, get your staff on board, your parents on board, and then be relentless with that. So, years ago, the Kansas superintendents came to the state board, said, well, they were commissioned by the state board, give us a definition of a successful high school graduate. This is what they came up with one exception, because the state board altered it, as they should. Successful high school graduate they said, as academic preparation, cognitive preparation, which they said was a combination of skills, some technical skills, employability skills, civic engagement. To be successful in post-secondary education, in the attainment of an industry-recognized certificate, or directly in the workforce without the need to have our skills remediated whenever we get there. Tell me what changed, what the state board changed. Cindy Lane was part of this, by the way. She was superintendent. State board added something that was not there when it originally came from the superintendents.
Industry recognized?
Pardon?
Industry recognized?
Nope.
No?
Civic engagement.
Civic engagement.
Civic engagement. And that came out of when we went around and talked to communities. Something either, I don't know if this is a Midwestern thing, Connie, or it really is a Kansas thing, but we heard over and over and over, we want young people that grow up and be in the service of others in their community. We want them to volunteer in the church. We want them to run for school board. We want them to be active. And so the board said, we're going to put that in there. So anyway, that just doesn't have to be your definition anymore, but that was the definition of the time. So I've every so often I dust this picture out because it reminds me of my mentor who had this saying. So chopping down that tree is really hard work. Would you agree? I mean, that's going to be a lot of hard work. And so we're chopping down trees. You're chopping down trees. You're trying to improve education for young people. My mentor used to say, Randy, what you have to ask yourself isn't if you're working hard, are you in the right forest? Are you chopping the right trees? Because you'll chop down trees. Are you doing the work to get the outcome that you desire? So you heard me a month ago say time's important. If I want to teach someone to read, and I have 6.5 hours a day, and I spend 30 minutes of that 6.5 hours teaching a kid to read, is that really important? I mean, these are, you see, you have to decide what is it that we really want that's important in the lives of the kids that you serve, and that's where we're going to go. So, here's question number 1 for you to think about, write down your thoughts. And this is pretty broad. So, if you think of a successful young adult who has graduated from a Kansas accredited school, so pick a, I mean, you can think of your own kids or grandkids or someone you know. And let's say they're 25. I mean, they're young, all right? But they're successful in your mind. Please describe in vivid detail the skill sets, the attributes, and the characteristics of that successful young Kansan. What makes them successful in your mind? What are the things that make them successful? And that may be different for all of you. So I'll give you just a few minutes to kind of just jot down your notes or how you do that, and then we'll have some discussion coming out of it. robust list because her kids are about to enter that age. So she's probably thinking about this a lot.
I might be pouring my frustration onto paper. And
I'm-
we get up on
I have
time.
a 4-year-old granddaughter, so I have a little bit to think about this, how we're gonna do this. Doesn't have to be perfect. As you finish that, again, you can be adding to it. I'd like for you to have a small group discussion. There's a big poster board here, but as you discuss, if one person could just record, here's everything Kathy said, here's everything Debbie said. Again, we're not taking anything off, we're just trying to capture your thoughts right now.
We're crowded.
You're crowded, okay.
Because you.
He's a default.
So, small group discussion, and there's snacks, help yourself.
I just started to think about my kids and how would I just sum them up? And I really, I think mine are very broad.
Well, today we have to have this, so we have to have a conversation. Literacy. That's not, you know, it's the full capacity of reading, which is comprehension and fluency, and writing that goes with it. And math, I mean, you have to have
Mine was
basics.
math.
You said academic basics.
Academic.
Let's go to, like, you have to understand.
Rattle yours off.
Like, what do you look for?
Yeah, that's what I said.
I drink all. I
If
drink.
they,
Could I add an image to that?
I have a little run of my stuff.
and I make a handbook,
Yeah.
you do one, and then
Right. There's skills that I be able to write.
Was that Jenna's job?
And then academically, I really did.
I think that's such a personal thing.
Okay.
It's really big in this, to stay in that lane of education.
Pizza, didn't have a top.
So what can be.
Yes, you know.
So that didn't have anything to do with anything. And always had a patient face
And that's where I sit, just kind of listening.
even if somebody did wrong.
It became really, really hard to that.
And then look, yeah,
That's in parentheses.
have to dress up in that way.
That's true.
Even if we,
That was that point, that's when they stepped up into the multiplication tables and, you know, interpersonal skill, missing that. Something.
We had
and then we get into whatever
They didn't have.
they were doing.
They didn't have to learn how to spell accurately.
And
Spell the
usually,
way it sounds.
I would be doing the second, and the manager would be doing.
Jim's bathroom.
I was, this is my favorite story.
You look forward to it.
They wanted the kids to be able to write more and express themselves more, write what they're thinking.
For that role, that definitely makes a difference.
So that's the foundation.
Maybe I'm just.
Themselves,
No, I
stressing all the
I
spelling
call
and stuff, when that's not supposed to happen.
Those are weekend.
You know, you want them to use their imagination, not be stressed out from music, you know, because they'll learn that as they go. Then when you're learning how to structure a sentence, you're not being creative. You're
And are you choosing someone, or are you bringing somebody in that's capable of responding to that?
Well, see, and I should get into my, I didn't write this down, is that if we advance children before they've mastered their level. And that's where I told people, I said, if you reading, writing, math, the court, we tested in the reading, writing, math, I do not think children should have grades 1 through 8. I think they should have levels 1A, 1B, all the way through 8A and 3B. And they should not, and there should be no stigma, absolutely no stigma to being in a level 2A, even though you're a third grader. Because in third grade, you're still gonna be doing third grade PE, third grade history, third grade science, third grade everything else. But you're reading, writing, and math, you're supposed to stay at the level until you master it. And then, like, I was talking to them at Phillips Learning Center, and they said they do that, that's how they do. And I was like so happy, I said, that's a school that does that, and they said the only thing that they had added in is that we just don't let, greater than 6 age difference. Which I thought, well, that's very doable. I mean, if you're a big enough school.
Skill sets.
Yeah, and my skill sets, I wrote down, good work ethic, manners. Those have to be taught. And able to manage his or her household budget.
Before they sign up.
Those are, I mean, because honestly, children, my kids are also different. Most of them are college grads, but not all of them. My son's an electrician. I think he's the only one that's not, oh no, and Lauren is working on her college though, she's a mom. But, the one thing that I was very happy to see is they could be working at freaking, whether coffee shop, whatever, and still buy their own house. My daughter bought her own house at age 21. On her own, and we didn't pay any of our kids' college, which, you know, they were really hurt by our house, because they didn't get any help at all. So they paid their own college, and all that came down to is they had good work ethic, they had manners, and they were able to manage their house, their budget, their checkbook. So when we talk about, we're talking about individual experience.
What's their life like?
Turn in your stuff, that's all.
Bureaucracy.
So let's come back.
Setting those expectations and then teaching them topics.
Well, my thoughts are, I've seen kids graduate from school, some go to college, some don't, some go to college like after the first year.
And you follow.
So that, you know, that changes their lives, because they weren't prepared for that, they thought they weren't prepared.
Because I think there's.
When I went door to door one time, I knocked on the door, and this young lady had graduated in 2012. And I said, so how are you doing? She says, it's not what I thought. She said, they did not prepare me for it.
Children in a way
She was very upset.
So I don't know, you would know
She
more.
was
than
not
to have
prepared, she felt like.
the discipline
So yeah,
stuff,
the,
but
some of the
even
skills
my
that are probably lacking in school,
principal for the day,
communication.
I got cut short.
I think taking the cell phones out of the class will help that. Being able to communicate with other
And the
people,
poor
other adults.
principal, you know.
And that's very important.
We
A
went,
lot of
of course,
kids
went
don't
sat out
do
in
that.
the waiting area, so she could
Tied
feel
to
that,
cell phones and
you know,
stuff, but,
even though we're
communication.
principal for the
I've
day,
seen other
wasn't
kids
really
graduate
anybody,
and they're very
and so we
successful.
sat there, but it was
Very
almost like we were
successful.
sitting in the office.
Because they, you know, they just have to
Great
break
time
out.
with Brian
So what
Burke.
are their
Setting
skill set
expectations.
and characteristics?
Sometimes that's the
Claire's way, or
Some,
Claire's way.
you know,
Address this.
it's maturity.
You have
I
a
would
policy,
say, how
you have
mature are you
so
in high
I
school?
mean, if.
Are you mature enough to set standards for you? Do you have goals? I met somebody that said every kid should set 5-year goals.
Mom and dad need.
They're gonna do this, 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 and this.
When you're going to.
Have a 5-year
work
plan,
or whatever.
especially upon graduation. Are you going to go to college or
I
are you in the
understand, but
military?
you
What are you
can't-
going to do? You have
can't
to start planning,
take the
because
whole
mommy and
school down to
dad
that level.
are not in charge
But-
anymore, you're
but at
taking
the same time,
responsibility.
because then there gets.
According to the law. Yeah. So, I
I
think, you know, responsibility, number one. If they're not turning their papers in school on time, they're not gonna do that as an adult.
Well, we didn't
Stress
remember
them.
No, that's what, I was gonna take
I
a
said,
picture.
well, I had a flat tire on the way to school, so I couldn't get my papers done today. Well, I'm sorry.
So strong academic
Go
skills.
cry it, go back home and cry yourself to sleep, do something. I mean,
Future
we need to have
focus.
kids have responsibility.
Oh, that's
I
good.
thought
So you
about
get into
it,
the world,
yeah, my
and
youngest
you go off
daughter
to college,
You know,
and the credit card creditors are there on
This is what she
campus.
did, she knew the university.
And when you take
that
out
she
those
wanted to
student
go to.
loans, those do not go away.
So when she said.
And if you're going to sign up for it, you need to know you have to
Up
pay
there,
that.
so it's like she then
And you know, there's
backfilled in.
scholarship programs, there's,
Goal oriented.
you know, KU has an education fund, different places have all these things that you can apply for and try to get
Productive
it.
adult.
But if you didn't do, if you're not successful in high school, don't count on it. So, I mean, there's so much that you want them to know
So are
by
you
the
saying
time they
like
graduate.
community oriented?
Responsibility, be
I
prepared.
actually
If you're just
said
gonna go in the
there's
workforce,
to development.
do the job interviews,
I did that.
practice job interviews. Be sure you have your resume ready. Have 10 people look at it, get some feedback. And a lot of it is done online. And even the interviews are done online.
They, in the spring, like all the
I
kids in
mean,
the school go
if
around.
they don't get that face to face,
They
and
clean, they plant
Yeah,
flowers and
accountability.
stuff like this, and they make the whole town look pretty. And they just, it's a small town, you know, they have that small town experience.
yeah, and it goes back to that part about
Right, you
parents.
can do, but the thing is that a lot of colleges are used to that, where the kids for their
Because I've
class
seen-
early on, the
And
freshman
I've
year,
seen a
already
couple of
get
boys,
a certain
I'd be
amount
really
of
surprised if they
reported
were
in
successful.
order for their grades, and that's what I
Dad
liked
is,
about that.
mom
Is
is
I
not
was
getting
talking
there.
to somebody, I remember, I said, you know,
They only got the one son. They didn't get the dad.
Yeah.
Is we have.
So,
kids
So
are
that's
getting it.
sad.
It's dumbing it down to that.
But that's not our responsibility.
Schools.
Because I listened to Thomas Sowell,
That are doing it.
and he said,
So I said, why don't
he
you?
said, when I got to school,
That is so funny.
I had to walk 15 blocks to get here before
You
little
have
kid.
to have so
I'm
many
so
points
sorry.
of your
No,
child doing.
the teacher was glad I just showed
That's
up.
yelled right there, but.
He's here now, I'm glad he's here.
It's through the home. The school's not
And
directed.
if you see Tyrus
So
on
you're trying
Fox
to get a little
News,
bit of the best of both worlds.
he was in a school and the kids could make fun of him because he said, Tyrus was big,
Some of these kids don't go to college.
Maybe you wanna mess with.
black
They'll learn
man.
how to read.
And this kid said, why are you doing
4-H
that?
is really big in that.
They were in
So
class,
does
and
the
kids
ER.
said,
I do like all
because I want to learn.
organizations because they do such.
And he influenced that 4-H, that he influenced the boy sitting next to him. Now he started studying and wanting to learn. So sometimes peers can help, and I thought that was
I
marvelous.
wouldn't see it yard down.
And I mean, they're out
It's a
there.
membership thing.
We shouldn't have kids that are in high school. And
4-H.
they should be on their way to becoming
As long as
independent
it's being a
adults.
service, right?
That's just my opinion.
So that's why
Yeah, I thank the Lord every day that none of my kids went to jail. Thank you, Lord.
I'm a senior
Great, I'll just
registrar for two of them.
Just like I said, I have 2 kids, I got one that's
Oh,
graduating.
okay, so
Right now she's
mission minded,
She's a senior.
enjoys academic settings.
She's currently failing
that
class.
kind of enriches their ability to
That is
think
an online
and
class. And I started,
collaborate with.
I thought about my kids, and then I thought
Resilience,
too about the people that I
personal,
hire.
people want to
Because I can interview
see the information,
mostly
coachable,
computer,
accept constructive feedback,
and everything kind of
humility,
software.
and
And
build
on the
quality
software side of
relationships
things,
with adults. I
I've
think
gotten
sometimes that's how.
really good at talking
See
about
them
how
all.
I'm not interested in people with computer science degrees and their or whatever,
And I
from a
thought
technical
did
institute.
the not advanced
want
them
people
to do
that are
levels
motivated
versus
to learn.
grades, did that?
And when you learn a new piece of software,
Attributes and
then
characteristics.
Appropriate.
as soon as you learn it, it's up.
And
There
advanced
is
by
already,
level,
the
not
next
by
language is
grade,
already on
in
its
the
way.
core
So
subjects.
if I learned Python, and I just judged, FBLA here a couple of weeks ago, most things
And I had a
have
really good
Python,
conversation
that's
with the principal
in a
then
couple of years
about that. This is
concepts
not.
coming in. So when I hire somebody, I had a young man tell me one time,
Change.
I didn't write this in stone.
You know,
He goes, "I'm not gonna write
it wasn't
this
very
in
fun
stone."
to talk to
I
him.
said, "Well, can you learn it?"
That he's talking
And
about.
he had to start to look at me and say, "Are you gonna teach me how to roll separate?" And he was a contractor, so he wasn't going to build your company. I said, "No, it's your job to write things that I need to have." He said, "Well, you'll send me this class where I want to." It's your job to go and teach that. And we had a little bit of a group here with it. He wasn't on my team, so I need people in our school to come in and tell me what the next thing like hold. I need to be ahead of people, which means they've got to be proactive in following their industry. You know, what's coming next so that they can anticipate. That's how to be successful in that kind of business.
they stood against it so
It's
hard.
great was that
Yeah, but
they
then
learned how
when
to love.
the students, it appears, when they get there, they excel
And I
because
think
there's
that's
no
such a big
competition
part.
or,
I mean, it certainly comes back to
getting
just
attention.
being able to learn that love of learning.
can't compete.
You can
That's
love
where
learning,
their
but
behavior
sometimes
and
I think some kids expect that person to be standing there holding their hand and saying, this is how we do
So much.
things. And learning how to learn means now I can
So what's the balance of that?
those are some of the things that I wrote as far as, I wrote down, pretty much all the Kansas can competencies. You each talked about a few of them, but definitely grit, self-starting, being able to have a conversation with someone.
Most of it would determine.
Effective communicators, civic minded, just in the context of being able to.
Yeah.
Well, I did not read it all, it was like 100
Cooperative.
pages,
it's
front
like,
to back.
and what you just said
And
is.
Learning core
when
subjects
I
and being able to
printed out
solve
the
them.
Kansas
So it's back to
statute,
that not needing
and
remediation.
it was also 100
Matches
pages
the
of
purpose.
that, so I was kind of thinking it's probably copied and
Pages
pasted.
I have.
So for special education one?
No, I was gonna copy.
All the, all the special education laws, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
policies change every day.
Show up there. I mean, reliability, because I've heard people hire people and they show up 3 weeks pretty much. And then,
Well, with teachers, because they get burned out, yeah, yeah.
I'll tell you.
But there is easy one.
Yep.
Whether it might be a grant, whether it might be a grant.
Because they don't know it.
there's,
And then you
I
have
mean-
parent fight on
This
the
is a
other side.
responsibility.
And then you have the professional advocates
Child
fight
is in charge of.
who know the
They
law.
do it when they ask
Well,
them.
counsel parents, oh, just so.
And be very
They
upset.
violated your child's IEP, that's a.
And we don't,
The federal government to serve.
we're gonna
Yeah.
be
It is,
the
it is.
parents, even if they don't have it.
Yeah, true.
I met,
Sorry, but we're-
I met one parent, her oldest son was in jail, so she was raising her younger boy. Her husband had been murdered.
Yeah.
So she said, my total goal is to make sure this son that I have left, she said, I just sold him in jail. She said, I have to make sure he doesn't get in the gang, because there was one of my husband. And raise him as best I can to get him through school, get an education, so he can do something with his life. She said, that's my total goal. She told me that. She said, I lost my first son. She's doing, so a single parent trying to do her best, to make sure that her other son is successful. So, yeah, you can run into those kind of situations. And, you know, they're doing the best they can, whether it's a grandparent, you know, I've seen kids that, where I worked one time, those kids' regulations, they're not in public, well, they're in public education, but they're in what we call the VA school, because they're so bad.
Alternative school.
Yeah, and, their goal there is to try to get these kids on the right track. And it's hard, because sometimes the parent is, well, one kid, well, his parents
For
are
the
jail.
school district.
So the grandparents were grandmas, and she was doing the best she could, because of the background that the kid came from. I mean, they're out there, but we can't be totally responsible for them. They're gonna live by their own
If
decisions.
there, you don't need the
Confusion
confusion,
is there.
you don't need that.
I get it.
We don't want to.
Yeah, no, that's.
I know parents,
Yeah.
your kid ain't living out.
Well,
And we need.
You know, if you don't follow.
We gotta take all this.
When you look at teenagers, you can tell.
But that comes down to the individual schools, and that's really has a sense in what the district will, I mean, they
Well,
allow
I'm
certain
just saying,
things
it's
to
the
get by.
accreditation aspect of this, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying, those are student misbehaviors. If they.
But I'm just saying that we have accreditation standards, I don't think are down to that child's behavior. I'm just saying that in our accreditation standards, if we don't even follow through, why should we expect?
You told us to follow up.
Yeah. And hold accountable ours, that's why.
There's stuff like that. And we don't, we're serious.
yeah.
that's important. Our system.
Just what people
Fix
can
whatever
say.
the issue is.
Right, which is great if it works. But that's a really big problem. And problem is always, that was my thing. You know?
Well, maybe 20 years ago or so, when Kansas City used this. I think that's.
I saw Spanish.
Okay, so maybe it's just a, so maybe KSDE has a huge turnover.
I'm not even sure what having an emergency way to get back in is a great. I mean, I'm not.
Okay.
You don't want to need to.
That's okay. Just want to give you a heads up, so you don't see what's.
I didn't bring mine, you can do it.
Not have to do that.
Okay. Not yet. I'm gonna ask you. Okay.
Kids.
So this is a question I think you're already moving to, but I really want you, you're developing your list, really good robust discussion. What is a successful adult gonna look like? Now here's the second question that I think you're going to, but I think it's the one then that we have to get to, which is this. What should be done well in the pre-K-12 environment, in a credit school environment, to ensure that this young Kansas is developing yearly to become the successful young adult you just described? Because this is now going to get to what do we do? Because some of these you may say, none of our business, that needs to happen, but it's got to happen at home, or it's got to happen in the community, or it has to happen in school. Because, you know, so now you're talking about, you're looking at what you talked about, and the second question that you'll put on your chart at the bottom is, what then should schools do to produce that young person? And I want you to think in two senses. A lot of you are jumping, as we do, to kind of that high school age kid as they're going into adulthood. But think about, what does a kindergartner need? What does a third grader need? How do you build that? What are the skills that you're wanting to build? How would we go about doing that in some structure? And again, right now you're here. Over the next couple of months, we're going to try to come where we have commonality here. That's the goal. It's not that anyone's voice is not going to be heard, but we can't do everything, right? Or we can, but then we're not going to get the desired outcome, as Ron Edmonds said. Kathy?
One of the things that I was starting to say with these guys was kind of looking at those things and what's the core thing that the ripple effect might occur. So we want to find that focus and then realize that the ripple effect could be half of that list if we do that core thing well.
And it's not that other things aren't going to happen, it's where do you want your emphasis for the next 2 years and measure against that. That's really hard because there's so many good things that you want to do and a local teacher wants to do. You know, so you just look at the girls' basketball tournament that just ended, and South Carolina and UConn had a game plan. They knew they had to play. It's for a national championship. They're very successful programs. And UConn executed that plan better than South Carolina. Is South Carolina a failure? No, but they didn't win that. But they had a plan. So now you're going to start to kind of, again, you're still brainstorming. What do you want to see in first grade? What do you want to see in 8th grade to develop that list? So we'll give you a little bit more time, then we'll take a break, and then we'll go to big groups.
Okay, so I think really concerned that level,
They should be able to read.
level 1A, level, it goes into that structure of the
I
school.
mean, that was
That's something that Senator
part of
Allen
the
asked me to do, tell me how to do the structure of the school. So I mean, like, I go to these praying about this sometimes prior. And this is something that I came up with.
They need to read
Can't have too many vegetables.
and math and be able to write.
And then,
Because
so I
my brother worked for
asked.
Social Security, and every letter they send out from Social Security is presented to the doctor. And if you can't write, then you can't send out letters. Yeah, comprehend with it.
Well, then this is a transition.
Some
It
kids
is?
are.
That's interesting. Okay.
That goes into
That's
the
So
under
or her name. Well, that's how we operate.
Because everything else is doable. Because we're
Even
even having
math
different
problems are
directions that those testings would go. And so the thing is that the stress in this time is your own experiential learning.
There's a shame.
30 minutes of reading a day is not enough. It's fine. Because yeah, phonics is the best. Because you can carry that with you forever, because it's still in mind.
No, I think we have those things on the table.
Well, and so, and that was one of the benefits of homeschooling, is they just didn't advance until they got it. And so you knew when you have an 8, a level 8 reading, writing, and math.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was in high school with a level 8 reading, writing, and math. I mean, back in the old days.
And that was that structure.
And so like, if you had a
That
child
could
now.
be different from social. So I think that's.
Yes, but what is it?
But it speaks to the reading level.
But if you look at like our age group here, a lot of them have.
Yeah,
And they
your
could
brain
read anything,
works
I'm
different.
sorry, that's in college, they could do any math that they needed to do to, so this is very high functioning. And that's why, so then you get into
Yeah.
college preparatory years.
Because the brain works at different part of the brain.
Would you?
If you're actually doing writing, you see, and that's all different parts of the brain. When you look at a screen, and all you have to know is in Silicon Valley, none of those kids have screens. And if they don't have screens, why do our kids have screens?
I'm gonna add to your focus, I'm gonna add self-regulation, because it's your like this, in the moment, age, either an infant or a voice, and definitely to the students, not self-service, because this is what's written.
And I would do it with math, because I mean, there's so many kids, because I'm a math person, and I would tell people, because they're in fourth grade, and they didn't catch on to that fifth grade math until now in fourth grade. They miss, it's like going up steps, and they miss stair steps, and now they're, every time they get to that second grade, third grade level, they have to make this jump, this leap of logic, because they don't understand how they got from here to here.
Yeah. Nothing right.
Affects their abilities to.
Yeah.
Lots of research.
Yeah, kind of what you're talking about, kids, because what they do in student health, there's, I think it was an hour and a half every day. All the kids broke out, every teacher was in
Yeah.
teacher, all the kids broke out, and they went to their level. And they had instruction, and then I was like,
It's just like selling, you always have to say they have an actual physics. It's just kind of.
Because they should also get assessed. They should be assessed at the grade level. They all have pages.
Why
I
would
believe,
you just
I believe they should absolutely, because
It's this or
you might even find that this 12th grader is not going, he's not going to college preparatory yet. He's not, that's just not his thing. He doesn't really like this stuff, or he's not, that's just not his thing. And so if he gets a level 8, so then I would have people in here that is either college preparatory,
I wish that it were true.
or it says what level, reading, writing, and math that you got. At 12th grade, that you, because if a child cognitively does not get beyond the 5th grade in math, so just whatever is going on with them, they're just not going to. But they have grades that says they accomplished 5th grade math. Not 5th grade, sorry, level 5. It's like get rid of the grade. Level 5, it means something here.
Huge times, it's been successful.
5th grade doesn't mean anything now.
So I wrote down quality curriculum.
When?
Maybe there's another, what's the next step there? I mean,
That's right. That's right.
I'll give you an example. I was working in my classroom. I was in a classroom where the teacher showed a video. I noticed something was pretty, she had several tabs on it, and she had to work it too. Kind of cringe, because I'm like, kids, obviously she vetted it ahead of time, so she should have known. It gives me pause, and why do you just grabbing something like that too? Like, or your assisted videos, so they talk about their exercise. You want to be a freak of and I forgot to find out about it. Talking to the kindergarten. Always make sure that she had like the student of the day or whatever. That greeted any
No, I had,
Does he talk about?
I believe in these things.
But if we took those.
well, I had a friend that said he thought, this is just his thought, that in 15 years, all kids will be learning from computer. It wouldn't be any better. And that's scary.
But it has to continue.
That's scary.
That's to keep us young.
Yes.
But the first grade.
Yeah, we need,
That and the second grade.
so,
So we find these poor things, seriously, just say please, thank you, sir, ma'am, that just serve them, please, thank you.
Yes, to tell them that. My daughter does. There's some gray area, right?
You know,
It's computer.
have to protect service. When our professor came in the door, we all had to stand to attention. Like when the teacher came in the door, we stood up to attention. And then the teacher would tell us, and we always said, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, sir. Yeah.
don't forget all the
Scholars. Do they have that kind of culture?
You're talking about the TCAL?
Well,
They're
the
doing it at
scholars,
home.
young scholars, they can, enter seventh grade,
Yep,
go
yep,
to yeah, that's the culture right
Where they,
there.
where they build and block them, accelerate them.
Right.
do it
And I
better.
don't, it's gonna be a place, but just that idea was.
And they can just want to find
And they do that when you do organizations or education.
Well, and there is specific research around that, specific around research on the classroom and the
Just
test
here's
page.
what we're doing.
Right.
We had to almost do a restart because oh, that's another thing we have to learn, and that's another.
That's the end of the line.
Oh,
That's the one, that's the one that's important.
yeah, and it's old school education. That was, we learned in high school.
It's one of the things that we
And it's exactly, that's true.
it's a life skill.
It's true.
So I have one question too.
The biggest thing.
Okay, we're gonna give you about 5 more minutes, and then we're gonna take a break and move to large group. So if you can get things on your chart,
Get it here, okay.
that'll help us when we move into the large group.
Responsibility, for sure, if you, it looks like.
It's a tool.
Prepare.
So how will we use,
Did you want
how
to?
will we use it appropriately?
Definitely, yeah, because it came up, yes, prepared.
Exactly.
You talked about loans and what projects.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably more responsibility. Yeah, financial.
But actually, each man.
No, I was just curious.
We had a bill, I mean,
How to pay your bills.
There's so many things.
Real financial
in our.
yeah, we had a bill,
Yeah, because that's
for financial literacy, when I was little.
We're so much grace.
But then there's other things that I'm thinking.
I mean, my kids don't have to write checks, but not have
Or
to deposit them.
again,
He worked in
But-
education.
but-
Well, he also, we went to some of the mail legislators, and told them, you need to have
It's just, it's nuts to me, so I attend that.
And that's where I just tell you.
Exactly.
So don't give them
Grandparents.
That's where
And our school.
And the desire.
That's what.
Does that go on here?
That's where my very
You're not
first.
supposed to be acknowledgement of fees, the right fit.
Yeah.
You talked about resumes.
What's important about this? And I said, I don't know, because I saw so
Resume and education,
in real estate.
business and then it can be
handled in
you
like,
said.
because it's a professional environment.
But not every job.
Professional environment. have to be tied to teacher licensing. Well, no, it was teacher licensing says culture, that's what I'm saying, your teacher licensing, you have ethical standards for any profession that you have. So that's where I said, if we get into that ethical culture of teacher licensing, because I can tell you a broker should not be allowed to have some environmental waste or testing. You get buyers and sellers that become very quite abusive to their real estate agents. And the real estate agents just and then they have to write things down. The broker cannot work hours working on to keep that bond. The broker can take it over. The broker can take it over. And then I guess you have to pass through the principals, I don't know.
But I got the time on
Yes,
that.
I think you guys are right, professional environment, and that, I think, we saw the loss of some of these early years. And I think, even the levels will talk
I have a
about.
couple of kids, that's what they do, healthcare with resumes.
Kids are frustrated, they're having to do third grade math, and they're really supposed to be in first grade, but they don't want to feel stupid. And there's a stigma to it because it's first grade, not level one, you know, and it's being compelled.
Building, no.
Right, and you gotta just be able to tell them, everybody's brain is way different. That's real, it's very scientific.
Yeah, I
did the reading thing, I did some different schools, and I have been doing it. And I'm reading, I make them read me, tell me what they teach, because a lot of times, and you'd be surprised. And so, this last one I did, there's 21 kids, and each of them could read a number of different. We rotated around, so each of them, each of them had different skills, but they were all
You know, I was having that here, because I think there's a lot of FEs that people bring from kids, underprivileged kids, but to be sorry for them and let them off the hook, just there's that.
This is the easiest day of your life,
So,
right?
you know, I tell them, don't let Johnny sleep in class.
Tell everyone,
As long as
man,
he's
I busted
come
today,
off the floor.
man, it was hard.
Let him wake up and learn something, so he can do better, and maybe he'll.
About 2 more minutes, get down on the sheet, or we put you in big groups.
They just, if you pigeonhole them, then all of a sudden their identity, you make that identity for them.
Exactly. And it's hard for them to let it go because I've got preferential treatment. Everybody's sorry for me.
Right, exactly.
And one
That's
of
what we see.
we were all doing this out.
Well, that doesn't
Control
change
over
that.
that environment.
Pizza Hut.
I was still when I went to my middle school, I'm sure we had students in there with issues of learning disabilities, but you never would have known. Because the teacher, there was zero house, misbehavior, the students knew it. If you acted out, you would be dealt with.
I said they learned 4 subjects in the
Let you sit down, shut my mouth. It's your good sense.
Yeah, or subjects.
Yeah.
Okay. So the good news for Danny and Melanie and Connie is that their small group is gonna become the core of our large group. We're actually gonna, as you take a break, I'm gonna move these to this table over here. You guys can just leave that table there, and then I'll move the chairs around here, and this will become our large group. We're then gonna take, so I'll take these from you, and I'll put those up on the wall. If you wanna take a 10-minute break, again, we have lovely snacks. Right? in honor of Betty's birthday. We mentioned it's Betty's birthday. We sang before you got here. Yes. Restrooms are just around the hall. There's tea and coffee and water. But we'll reconvene at just about 3:12, and I'll rearrange the room here a little bit. So go ahead and take a break. We'll be right back. Conversation was getting so robust, we said, we gotta share this. We're spinning so well, we gotta share it. So, you now have what you somewhat talked about in your small groups up on the wall. Obviously, you know, we'll have some people elaborate on that. But now you're putting those two questions together, and you're just now broadening the conversation about, and this is something I felt really important about, or I heard, and if you need to use the wall to refresh your memory, use the wall. If there's something that comes out of the big group that's not on the wall, feel free to just go put it on any of them, it doesn't matter. We're just kind of collecting your thoughts right now, you know, as we're far from the narrowing down phase. So this is now what you were talking about in the small group, this is an opportunity to now be in the larger group. And the reason we don't start in the larger group is to make sure everyone gets their voice heard. Sometimes as you get in a little bit larger, someone may feel like, oh, I'm not gonna contribute as much now, versus when we're in threes. Okay? All right, here we go. This is the big group discussion, or what you just talked about.
Oh, whoa, so.
There's no leader. You gotta decide your leader. I know you, I'm not leading it, this is yours.
So, my big push, I'll just jump in there, is making sure we have those core academics, because nobody is successful if we don't have reading fluency, writing fluency, the math, the basics. So those core basics, they have to be there. So we have to, in my opinion, I say have to, my thoughts is, we have to get those undergirded, because we know we have to choose that. Everything tells us that. So it's how do we do that, and how do we focus better on those things, and then build from that. On the idea of skills as far as your personal skill sets, I love Ben Proctor's story when he talks about the kindergarten teacher that he had, I don't know if she's still there or not, who, if anybody came through that door, she had a kid for the day or whatever that was up, recognizing the adult, introducing themselves, doing that. And to me, that revolves around that scaffolding idea and the whole culture of the building, to where you're taking that from the littlest and you never stop. Every teacher sitting in that place, because there's so many things that are learned right there. Just in those easy moments of, this is how we speak to each other, this is how we speak to a guest that comes in our room, this is how we do this. Like those, to me, those are so easy. And if they're built upon continuously, and you have an entire building that's working toward those can be accomplished in really great ways that don't have to be difficult. I'm not saying there wouldn't be difficult moments, I'm just saying, to me, those basic founding, those ripple effects from there can be huge. So, and one of the things that keeps catching me every time we have a school come talk to us about whatever it is, the last ones were the two that won the awards, right? They talk so much about school culture. And within that is teacher retention, and kids are doing better, their academics are better, like everything seems to flow out of that. They're truly collaborating as a building. So that's something that just keeps, the school nutrition part was the same way at Farm to Plate. They talked about all the ways that one thing affected everybody. So that's where my mind keeps going back to those core things that are really quite basic and simple, but have huge ripple effects when they're done well and consistent. Because I think consistency is absolutely huge. It can't be this teacher does it this way, and I'm not saying they don't have their own personalities, but if you have those basics within a building that just keep building on each other, not just in academics, but in those kind of skill sets, I think we can see.
Kathy, can I just ask, do you see administration as supporting, is it the administration setting that, or is it just the way they support their individual teachers and how they recognize the strength of each teacher? And I mean, and not just the teacher, but I mean, it filters down.
Right, well, to
But-
me, what I was hearing, listening to these schools as they came in, is that whole team collaboration, that yes, you have leadership, but the leadership identifies and I would assume helps pull together all of those things working together. But it was to me very obvious that at least by the ones representing the school, that it's just a huge full effect of them all working together. So leadership support, building that, but everybody having that buy-in.
Kathy, can
Is
I push you just a little bit?
that
What do you see then as the role of this board to get those schools there? Right? I mean, is it a teacher issue, is it principal, is it a curriculum? Where do you see the lever then that this board can use or get away from?
That's
Right.
exactly where I would
Yeah.
be more about the getaway
Okay.
from, making sure we are not adding on to plates that are literally pulling away from those core things that could be happening, but everybody's balancing so many things. Nobody has the time or energy to, yeah, and that's what I love again about the KISA new framework, because it pulls that back in. And it says, I mean,
Ben,
every time Ben says it, those high
Simplify.
leverage fundamentals, that if we do them very, very well, the ripple effects are there and we will see it. So, to me, that's just been that thing that just keeps revolving in my mind in the midst of all of it. Because I think you could apply that to absolutely everything. You were starting to say something.
So how do we get back to doing the core stuff and get rid of all this Barbara Streisand stuff that we do?
Well, I think, well, let's get rid of
Well,
it.
the accrediting
What's the
standards,
Barbara
what's-
Streisand? That's his word to be.
I was gonna say, I think we need to review the accrediting standards, if there's so much, like you said, that there's so much required, if we can get that down to a science, like those cores, what is needed, and then let the local school boards fill in the rest, but those cores, but then the beauty of that too is, and I always say this about the kids, if you don't let them fail, they don't learn. If we don't let the local school boards have a window of failure, they don't have to ever live up to a certain standard in their school boards. They don't have to push their schools or their superintendents to have better outcomes, because they're never gonna fail. They're always never gonna lose their accreditation. And that's where, if we can make it simpler though, so that, you know, if they did lose it, it wouldn't have to be punitive for that long period of time or anything. It's just something that they are expected to live up to though. They'll have to do some work to stay there. But when, to Dr. Watson's question, the only person who says, who do we affect, the superintendents of this or that, I don't think we affect any of them. Our relationship should be with those local school boards. That's who, you know, we've got the legislators and the local school boards, and the local school boards, that's their staff. That's not our staff.
Well, their staff is only the superintendent though.
Well, there's superintendents also over the teachers and stuff, but they have effect over the whole, they're constitutionally, they operate, maintain, and control the schools.
Okay. But we gotta make sure we stay on point.
That's why I am though, this is a constitution. We have a relationship with those local school boards, so when we focus on our relationship with the superintendents or with the teachers, and you know, getting down into the nitty-gritty of all their business, I think that we're getting off track instead of just setting those goals that they have to reach. And we're doing that general supervision, not in their business supervision. What?
Okay, the one thing that I just wanna throw out there, just food for thought. The assumption that all students are not at the same starting point. And if you accept that,
Sure.
some are coming in there ready to learn, some are not. And so, one of the things that has helped is to examine what the reasons are. That's why interventions and all of that was put into place to help those students achieve. Well, I'm if they don't have the confidence, they're not going to absorb or capture. It's more difficult to teach a kid who does not believe in him or herself, than it is for somebody that's coming in really confident and ready to learn. That takes into consideration kind of the family background, the family structure, what's been provided for them. When they come with that confidence and they're ready to learn, they reach that goal. But if we factor in that no students come to us the same way, then the question would be, how do you prepare those students, a significant number, to be able to receive those core subjects where they will try to excel? I noticed that, as an example, if you have a child, you love to read, that's something typical that your child is going to end up enjoying reading. They tend to reflect those things that they learn. And so if you come from a situation, I think, how did you describe it? A teenage parent.
Immature.
That, I chuckle at that. The teenage parent that's never provided that structure, then you have to take into consideration, we're dealing with another segment. And so how do we get that segment on board as well? Some are prepared to move forward with the core and probably will be successful. But what about those that aren't?
Can I ask though, kind of a fun, I'm old school, because I remember as a child really struggling emotionally, had a stable home, but I got into a school setting and there was a lot of, I was a stammerer. And so I had a big emotional hurdle to get over, to read in class because we go around the circle. So my perspective is that, okay, what you just described is true. Kids come into that setting from all different perspectives and levels of whatever. It seems to me like the thing that brings everybody to the right level of where they can actually be successful, was another discussion we had, maybe, is that when they accomplish something that they didn't know they were capable of. And I look at, I see my grandkids, they're just toddlers, their minds are like sponges. They wanna learn, and I see our goal setting, whatever, and as we, as a board, set standards to kind of feed into that every child really, unless there's some, mental disability, I understand it. But the child that has the capability of learning to read, no matter what their background is, if we, recognize that the brain at that age is wanting to soak this stuff up, then I look at, that's what the fundamentals, those core issues are so important, because that's where they gain a sense of self-respect, they experience success, and even the law says that you withhold a child until they're 7 and bring them into the classroom, they will soon catch up. And it's for that reason. It's because they want to learn. They're growing, God made us to want to learn and to gain something that we don't have. And all we have to do is just provide the tools.
I was just saying, and they need to be challenged.
Yeah,
Right,
challenge.
that's right. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah. You know what, one of the most awakening things for me being a state board member was one of my first trips out in the districts. I cornered some parents in the special ed department, the SPED department of one of the districts out west. I think it was Stafford. I don't remember exactly, but they were on their lunch break, and I said, ladies, there's 4 of them in there. I said, and they weren't necessarily, they were unclassified, a couple of them. They were volunteers, basically. I said, what is the biggest issue you see? And they said, well, we get 5-year-olds that have never had a crayon in their fingers. And it's like, how does that happen? And so the reality is, you just give them those basic things that are normal for kids to have, and challenge them, and give them that, and push them in that direction, and they're gonna take off.
And so that brings, what about those kids that aren't given those basic things? And those are the ones that I'm addressing. And since you like to look at data and statistics, you're seeing an ever increasing number of free and reduced or families that are struggling more so. And I'm saying that could also be happening to the students, that there are those that weren't given those basic things. The one thing I just don't want to be guilty of is taking things out of that have happened in my personal life and assuming that that goes for everybody, because it doesn't. I grew up poor, but I had a lot of other things that were structured for me. And so it was a difference. I can't come to the board table assuming that's everybody's story. We have to be able to look outside of our own story, because we're not representing just us. We're representing all of us, all. And there are some exceptions. So that's what I'm saying, is if we look outside that box and say, well, I had a pretty good life. This happened very easily. I was able to overcome. I was challenged, and I met those challenges. But then we were also talking about that introverted kid that's withdrawn. And how often do you see those? And if we say all kids, then we have to be concerned about that.
I think, isn't that part of the local school board though? I mean, that's where the local, we're setting the standards for those local school boards to meet those standards.
Okay.
How those local school
Good
boards.
question. I was answering the question.
Yeah, can I speak? I know, can I speak? Because the local school boards, to this question, because I had that said to me, that some things I say go to the local school boards, that I think that goes to local school boards, when you're setting how all these kids have different needs, that's going to be more the local level. We're setting the standard. Here is a standard, how that local school board is going to take this child with more needs and that child with less needs and bring them all to that standard is a local school board.
But Debbie, the question says, if you will read it, I was answering the question.
I was just responding.
So my curiosity is, Dennis, you said you walked into these 4 pairs and they talked about they have kids come in that have never held a crayon. So I'm assuming the conversation went a little further. Did they say the kids grasped it pretty easy? Because I'm not real sure where you're
Well, it was kind of in the context of SEL. Because I was curious as to how is this working out in the classroom? What is the approach? And so part of the conversation, went with, well, we have to have them, what's the word? I've lost it. Get them to a point where they're emotionally stable enough that they can learn. Well, I guess my question is doesn't some of that issue that what we call emotional disturbance or whatever, the ESI issues that will arise in a classroom has to deal with a disruptive child or something. And I have to throw in Great Bend right here because they have a special program right now where they remove that child and they give them 2 or 3 weeks in a controlled environment, which is working for them. It was good news. But in general, if you take the core issues of what a child wants to know, I see this as natural law. I mean, children, if you watch them play, and we looked at screen time, and that's another issue that I didn't have to deal with that. I mean, we didn't get a TV till I was in 7th grade. It's like I never had to deal with screen time. But, so that's another big one, and what's really sad is if a 2 or 3-year-old is in pre-K and they've had a PlayStation in their hand and never had a crayon and piece of paper in their hand, I'm wondering if that isn't part of the issue. Because there's certain cerebral developments that happen when you are using a pen, you know, the connection between the fingers and the frontal lobe. So I'm just saying that it appears to me that the whole idea of going back to the core, like Danny's trying to direct us so many times, he uses that, you know, as let's just get back to the fundamentals, the academic fundamentals. That to me that is really important too, is that there may be just some simple things that we've put on the shelf, you know, the paper and pencil and the chalkboard with the teacher up front directing diagramming a sentence, that type of thing, that never happens in the classroom anymore. But that was what education was for 150 years. And look at the generations that it produced. That's my argument.
I can remember, reading, writing, arithmetic, everything with 3 R's. Yeah.
With your confidence comments, don't kids gain confidence though as they have something put in front of them that they can then purpose to do? Like, because I don't know how you develop confidence in a child if you're not giving them something that they're doing, like that they're working on, because that generally comes through the doing. Like, I'm not sure when you say that, I guess what
It's like having a kid that's willing to try. You know, I mean, if you child one, you can get on that bicycle and take off, and another is like day after day after day after day after day. So, yeah, you eventually will build confidence. But if I take it, if I take it and into consideration, I'm saying here's a kid that's able to learn at a faster pace than this kid. This kid, because they didn't have the confidence in our educational area, the way the classes are taught. Of course, now there are I just used that word long ago, where they are taken and given a little remedial help. But the class still progresses at a certain level, progress at a certain level. And so if you have 5 kids in that class that for some reason they don't have the confidence to even try to read, or they feel like, why bother, it's never going to amount to anything. And then there are kids, that we want to believe it or not, that are raised that you really won't ever be able to do anything.
Right.
And that's a fact. And so all I'm talking about isn't so much our beliefs, but for those kids. If we stand behind the fact that we're saying all students are supposed to be successful, then we have to take into consideration the group over here, which is what we do.
Sure.
And there are some that are ready to jump in with the core.
And I think that's where I go back to, and I will probably keep doing it, that whole school culture, because the ones in those buildings know those kids and know how to engage. I was in Dodge City a while back, and they were talking about something they'd gone in, it was really similar to something else I'd heard, but this whole idea of really, it was a whole building collaboration for every kid, and kind of, gathering them into different groups at different times of the day or week or whatever, and building from that, that whole idea. And I think part of it would be on an academic level, as well as every, different levels, but there's so much there that they can do. And again, coming from that place of not adding 2 plates on their plates, because locally I do believe they know they need. So I want to be cautious at the state level. Have we put too much into it to where they don't have the ability to focus in on some of the things that they want to do, that the ripple effects might actually be there to deal with some of that.
I went to one of the buildings, and they were introducing me to a few of the students, and so the principal talks to this little girl who's really shy. She said, "Would you tell Miss Arnold what you learned to do really well?" She looked at the principal, she said, "Jump rope."
That's not easy. As an adult, I understand.
But Betty, that was success. For
Yeah,
her,
and
for her mind, it was
and
success.
so the principal said, "Well, yeah, you do that, but that's not what I want you to share."
But
I was like, why would I was thinking for?
remember that story.
the thing of it is though, we always have all different levels. We,
Society's
everybody's at a different level. And some, based on the young classrooms that I've been over the last 3 years, there's not one kid that doesn't wanna learn, but each one of them is their own individual, even the ones that have never touched a crayon, or maybe can't even look somebody in the eye, even at kindergarten level. But there's all those different levels, but the focus of these kids is they wanna learn. They wanna learn. Now, they're not, I don't think any of them are scared to learn, based on the classrooms the 85 classrooms that I've been, 88 classrooms that I've been in.
There was something you said, and I'll let you jump in, that really struck a note. You were talking about a school you they had this group of kids, the leader in you, and you know, how they pretty much had this structure of hi, welcome to maybe the school, and that's something that it's pretty easy to learn. And just the confidence that you started to see in those kids, and that's all I'm saying.
That's such a
It
people
could be
skill,
something-
isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, to me,
It could be
those can be
something
built
just
to be
as
those
simple as that.
those
Right.
employability skills, those
100%,
social
100%.
skills. Yeah, that's what
I look, you know, in different areas of life, you talk about common denominators. What is, it's like what Danny was describing. We're gonna have this broad spectrum in society, that's just reality. You know, you have people that excel in science, and math, and then you have your wonderful plumber who gets down in a ditch and digs a hole. So there's all these different skills within society, which is normal. And I think when you look at even children, that's kind of the way it is. And so what is the common denominator that will bring as much of that together so that everybody in their talents and skills, whatever, God-given things, that will bring them up to a point where they will, that they will brand as success. You know, I think we get really out of bounds when we say, well, this is what we call success. I mean, I have a 30-year-old son who's, man, I was frustrated, you know, when he was 22, dropping out of college and stuff. I didn't know where this kid was going. Came back from Germany and was, you know, got hooked on alcohol, and now he's just graduated from Sterling with a history degree. He's gonna teach. He owns a business, and he's a plumber, HVAC guy, and a father of one, and just doing a great job. I mean, it's just like, I mean, I had to back away and to a point and just let him figure it out. Now, little kids, you know, they're immature, they can't do that. But what is success? I mean, you know,
In our group, we talk a lot about just the basics of reading. I mean, that is a skill in life that, you know, it crosses everything. It crosses your workforce to your college preparedness. I mean, just that focus on reading, I think, is a very big thing. And I actually it's really been on my heart ever since our visit to the school for the deaf. You know, just how important that reading is to them. And it made me wonder how many of them maybe even struggle with the dyslexia and their deafness, you know? And I didn't get to talk very much with the Phillips when I visited there on that subject. And I wanted to talk to them more, and I will one day, but they didn't seem to think that that was as big a deal as it seemed to me. But it did to me. I just thought, they're children just like any children. They're gonna have dyslexia probably at the same average, and maybe even higher if they've had any, brain damage that caused the hearing loss. That might also affect dyslexia. But,
Connie, so, you got anything?
Well, I was just thinking about my two youngest children. My youngest son went off to kindergarten, and the first week he's there, I get a phone call. What am I gonna do with Derek? Now, looking back on it, I should have just pulled him out and kept him home another year, because he really wasn't ready to go to school. Now, Mary, my youngest daughter, she didn't go to kindergarten. She went straight to first grade, because I kept her home for kindergarten and taught her myself. So there's two different kids, same family, same parents, two different ways they learned. Mary was ready, Derek wasn't. And so what I've learned from that is, especially boy children, you need to really look at them and see if they're ready to go in there and learn, to sit through a class and learn. And sometimes at 5 years old, they're not ready. At 6, they're more mature and they're more ready. So I think every kid's different. I don't care if they're in the same family, the whole school. You have 20 kids in your classroom, everyone's gonna be different. Like Betty said, some are gonna be here, some are gonna be here. So a teacher needs time to figure all that out. And if we burden her with other things to do, then she doesn't have time, and she needs that time. Smaller classrooms might help. 15 kids is different than 20. So these are the things that's probably part of our responsibility. And like I said, in my family, the two kids, same mom and dad, same brothers and sisters, they saw all this, but one was ready and one wasn't. And I think that's the same thing we're dealing with in education as a whole.
And you bring up a really great point about the smaller classroom, but with the teacher shortage.
Yeah.
That almost eliminates that, because I was looking at, going back to a yearbook. And in my class, it was 12 students. You didn't see that, did you?
So we haven't heard from Burl?
Yeah.
No. So we need to hear from you too.
Certainly. No, I'm just sitting here thinking, this is probably one of the most opportune times we could have as a board in history. And that is because of the economy, funding, a lot of things that schools have been used to for decades, they may not have as resources in the future, but the resources that they do have, they know how to use them and how they've been effective for children. And maybe if we take like a universal perspective on what we could create to recommend to district leaders that could hopefully flow down to school level, they would look at us more as a trusted advisory agency than just some people that meet for 2 days each month. But I think it would take someone formulating a clear program that could then be shared with districts. It couldn't be, you guys do what you want to, or we think this might help. It would have to, I think, we'd have to really frame a very clear, detailed program on how we could recommend they use the resources they currently have without new funding and go back to focusing on the basics. And I think a lot of district leaders would say thank you, because right now, they're trying to figure out what next year will look like. Will they lose staff? Will they lose the title teachers? And if they do, how are they gonna address the needs of those students who are at different levels? So to me, it's kind of like a dream situation if we had the right things in place and people who could really form a plan. I know we're losing Dr. Proctor, but maybe somebody else.
Renee's got big shoes to fill.
And build it on what they're looking to to see from school districts, through the current plan. So I don't know. My mind always just goes to, you know, oh, this is an opportunity. Let's see what we can do. And that's how I made it as a high school principal, you know. Things that were looking crazy, you know. I said, oh, this is an opportunity and maybe we can develop something. And it typically works, so I don't know, that's what I was thinking.
What a challenge.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Well, my friend was sharing with me the other day, she was teasing, she said, she was my secretary back when I was an assistant principal. And she said, those kids would come in and you just talk to them and encourage them and walk them through the handbook and let them know what they did. Tell them they're gonna be suspended for 3 days, but we'll look forward to seeing you come back. And she said the kids would leave and look at her and say, Miss Berry, did I get suspended for 3 days? She said, you sure did. But it was an opportunity for them to learn, you know, without me beating them over the head. You know, so,
Exactly.
yeah,
That's
so,
good.
thanks, but that's what I was thinking
And
about.
I love how you're saying that with the absolute opportunity, positivity in all of it. And if that's displayed, I think that always makes a difference. And usually that's what you hear from students who
And
talk
you're
about
allowing them to
teachers
fail.
who really impacted their
If that
lives.
first, but having supports in
Exactly.
place. so
Exactly. It's not
that
shouldn't.
doesn't happen.
It's just
Pat
consequence.
back.
Yeah.
So
Give
how,
them hope for the
Melanie, do
future.
we wrap this into a state board thing?
So I looked up at the wall at our stickers from earlier, and for me, it's pretty easy to distill these into just a handful of things. There's morality and essentially values at a personal student level, competence, which goes back to the competencies, the Kansans Can career competencies, ultimately. A lot of these things are on that competencies list. And then I see IPS in a lot of it because there's talk about having a resume and, it's a little bitty over there so I can't see it now.
Right.
But there are a couple that go back to pieces of IPS. And then the without remediation piece. I hear people talking about going back to those core subjects. And when I think about the vision of a graduate and that without remediation, that's really what we're talking about. We want to make sure that they have the opportunity to learn, that they love learning, that they do learn, and then that they can apply that without the need for remediation as they graduate. And so in this conversation, I pulled out a handful of things. I love your ripple effect. What's the one big thing? Like, let's find one thing that can have those ripples and be very effective. Ben's high leverage fundamentals, intentionality, school culture, which is one I talked about or I didn't talk about in our last retreat, as being like, that one's near and dear to my heart, just because I have watched over a couple of decades, I can't say many, a couple, just that friction between teachers and administrators. And when you have a great administrator who gives autonomy to those in their school and allows them to do the work, you see that in student success. When you have someone who's micromanaging and telling teachers what to do and, ruling, I think that's where you see these cultures start to break down. That's part of, just one part of our teacher retention challenge.
Yes.
And then we talked about challenging them. Like, kids, to your point, kids need to be challenged. They're going to rise to that occasion, but you've got to give them the challenge. And to me, all of these come right back to KSDE. It's,
Yes.
we're right in the middle of this. We're doing it, and it's brand new. I had the opportunity to go, was that just last week, to Greenbush and sit through one of the school improvement days, and it was amazing. If you haven't been to one, you've got to go.
There's a couple left, yeah.
There are a handful, yeah. Get the list, get out there, because it is just so impactful.
To see those collaborations.
Yes, and because you've got different districts, kind of, there's some crosstalk, but at the same time, you've got the building leadership teams sitting together. They're not in the building. They get to sit, just like us, they get to sit down together and actually have a conversation. And that is so hard to do when you're in the building and your walkie-talkie's going off and people are coming in and Dr. So-and-so and kids everywhere. It's just such a great opportunity to have that offsite and really get in there and dig into what we want from KSDE. But I recognize too, as we sit here, it's brand new. We're just getting started on KSDE 2.0. So we don't know what that's going to look like immediately. Feels a little hard to make some of those decisions right now when it's so new. I also wanted to highlight that one of the things I pulled out that we didn't write on our chart was the life skills piece, because we've talked about those life skills. And I'll remind the board, especially for those who weren't here, that when we did the graduation requirements, those students said, we don't wanna take PE because we don't wanna change our clothes, we don't have access to showers, we don't have time, like, we don't want PE. And that was part of why we went from 1 full PE credit to half credit for PE and half credit for health, because we did talk about healthy exercise and being healthy. But they also said, when asked, what class would you like to be required, they said agriculture. That was high on the list. But life skills, ultimately, the number one thing they wanted was life skills. And so I see financial literacy, and I think that we need to not lose sight of that.
Right. To me, that flows with the whole math part of it as well, because those are the life skills and it requires math skills to make those happen, because without them, it's not gonna.
So if we're gonna talk about life skills, I would like it to be black and white, not a whole bunch of gray, because that's part of financial literacy. We don't teach basic financial literacy. So what does financial literacy mean? We
Dave Ramsey.
I don't know, I'm on that committee. I haven't asked them though what their program is. They do them.
I'm not, just, if we're gonna simplify things, then we need to simplify it, and not have all this gray stuff out there, which I'd love to have gray, but no. I'd like we need to, you know, what is financial literacy? We don't have any detail. So we're gonna go out, I'm gonna borrow $80,000 for college. I don't know how I'm gonna pay it back. And my job's only $35,000 a year. How's that work? We don't,
We do have.
and so
But
we're
the
not,
state
we
board
don't,
did
again,
say
we
so.
haven't talked
That's
about
what they are.
parents here.
Yeah.
And the kids that don't have parents, or maybe a one parent, or grandparent, or great grandparent, they have to be involved with a lot of this too. And we haven't even talked about that.
We did, in our group.
There's one thing I really want to highlight, and that's on our, more focus on IPS. And I have, I've read a lot of research, and I don't know if that's what they called it, but when kids can see what they're taking fits in with their career, it is amazing how they start to connect. Now it makes sense. I had I don't know what it's called now. Anyway, I had a company that was giving the science department an award. And just in his conversation, he mentioned how much, just straight out of high school, kids can make. So the kids are sitting like this, you know, they're listening to him. And he said, you could come to our company and make as much as $80,000. And I did. I said, okay. And so the question, all of a sudden they were engaged with the representative that was giving the award. The question they asked is, then what do we need to be taking to prepare for this? And I will never forget how much excitement I saw in those kids that, well, what kind of classes? And they actually were absorbing, listening to what it is they need. So I'm just saying, more focus where if they have identified, I want to be, and I think the example that really stood in my mind was this kid that was really good in sports. And he said, I won't need that because I'm gonna be yeah. But the thing is, when the information was provided, well, you need math because how else are you gonna, all of those things that are relevant. do the plays or whatever
They brought it down into his world.
They brought it down in,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, it made a difference.
Right.
So I am thinking that the more that we can make this relevant to the
Right.
students, the more enthusiasm
Oh,
we might begin
100%.
to see from this.
100%.
And which is why, even though I had it as number one, my partner in crime decided to put this. He said he had to be in it. So
Yeah, that's right, you took control, I understand.
Okay, so can I wanna change my answer entirely, I mean, not change it, but I really want to highlight, to your point, project-based learning is so effective. And I recall, as you were telling that story, I was thinking about Brad Newenswander standing in front of us talking about falling off a roof when he was doing construction in the summer,
Yeah.
and the geometry factors in that. My neighbor is a master teacher in Kansas, and she loves to tell a story about her son when he was little really wanted this drum set. And what's it gonna take for me to get the drum set? That's a project, right? So how do you motivate? He had to raise the money.
Mhm.
He had to figure out, what am I gonna sell? How am I gonna come up with the
Yeah.
dollars to go buy this drum
Yeah.
set? So those project-based learning opportunities, I think, can be a huge piece of the how.
Go ahead, Bonnie, you had your hand raised.
No, I didn't. No, it's just.
So I'm against the individual plan of study. Again, we're talking about simplifying, get things core, but everything I hear now, we're not simplifying. Individual plan of study, because I don't know what the percentage is, but I bet there's a lot of kids that don't just go into what their individual plan of study is. And the other thing I have against that, because big business now wants us to take care of the workforce for them instead of them taking care of training those kids in the way to do it their particular way. And I struggle with that big time.
Well, we have to make sure we're talking the same language. To me, IPS, now I am not for requiring it of every district. What I like is, and I've wanted to change the word training and the career training to the exploration. They definitely have to have things put before them and understand what it takes to get there. My concern with a lot of rural districts in my district is they don't have the staff. And so it ends up being a program on a computer. And that's not what you're talking about. But that's what, when we put these things on districts, because that's my thing. Locally, where it can work, and I know it works well. We've had so many people before us, and it does work well. But is it something the state should be requiring of every single district? That's my concern. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen or it can't happen, but are we, and this is what I love about KSDE now, it makes sense to every district, and it's doable by every district. So my concern is when we start taking these different things and we say every district must, we have to remember, just like every kid comes in differently, we have districts that are less than 100 to 40-some thousand kids. Does that make sense in that arena to literally, essentially try to force every district? And as that has done, my understanding is it's ended up being another computer program that kids are just popping around on. And is that helpful? I don't know, but I'm wondering about the state mandate that falls in when the ripple effect can be, if you're teaching them the relevancy of what that looks like and encouraging them in the way that gets their attention, then they'll take those courses and they'll go that direction and hopefully engage in a lot of the different organizations that are available. And actually I watched a hearing and somebody, I don't remember which one it was, House Ed or K-12, I forget, but it was at Abilene, so Scott Hills brought in, and they had a whole different thing that they're doing. It wasn't one of the, many organizations like we end up with
You're talking about
CTSOs.
partnership?
It was a business thing.
Okay.
But we have local districts doing a lot of things that sense in their community and for their kids. Again, my concern is, do we really wanna push that from a state level? And what that does too, because this is what I hear from my districts, and I have some very small ones out there. So it really, really makes them struggle with their staff and doing the best they can for their kids, because they do know their community and what their kids have in front of them. And they do everything they can to, they're building small businesses within their schools. I mean, there's a lot they're doing, but some of these things really force upon them stuff they really can't do or don't see the value for their set of kids.
So if they can't do the core things, then what good is the individual plan stuff?
You know, I agree with you. Which is why I sit in the core, because to me, that's the ripple effect that can come from it. But the districts that I've been around, I mean, their hearts are there, they're working hard. And the more state mandates on certain things like that, really make it difficult.
So what we're doing now, and I'm a dummy, is not working. So we need to get down to the basic stuff for these kids, that they can read and write, do arithmetic, and maybe there's some computer skills, and go from there. The rest of the stuff is gonna happen, but we're also, all this data we're taking in scares me a little, and it causes problems in the districts, because they have to hire extra people to with data security. Don't tell me that.
What combines kind of the two of you, if you combine the two of you, I think that's really very smart, because you're saying you've got small districts, Betty has a very large district, but what you're saying is if we're requiring just the very basics, then your small districts can be more flexible to provide the extra things that a small district can, and a large district can provide the extra things a large district needs. But it becomes a lot more individualized at the local level, but the core is what we're focusing on and making sure they have that core reading and that core math and the core things that, because like you said, there's a whole range of people, and they don't all have to know math at the level of every other one, you know, to be successful.
I think Betty was next, and then I'd like to go.
Oh, yeah, just a few minutes.
Okay, but then I'll try to make it
And
really
I'll be
quick,
quick too.
because I'm thinking, as you talk about IPS, maybe it's not, maybe it needs to be expanded to show how it would include other areas. Because we also talked about career counseling, and I was sharing about how, you know, coming up, how I was instructed, which is now coming up in the terms of SEL, but how that was actually taught to me was all that, and the different methods that were being used. So maybe to address what you're saying is, if it was expanded where it could include doable things based on, yeah, it could work.
I'll just say real quick that there are a lot of reasons I ran for this seat, but one of them specifically was I felt very strongly that my high school could have done a lot more to set me up for success. I graduated from high school in 1995. I never once sat down with a counselor who talked to me about college.
I had 10 minutes.
And my parents were divorced, did not have the cash sitting there to send me to college. There are so many kids that will benefit from those conversations. So obviously there's a lot of opportunity for us all to have a much bigger conversation about IPS. But I just wanted to remind that we've been having this conversation about IPS as a board for a number of years now, before some of you were here.
Right.
And ultimately, part of the decision around that was IPS needs to be much higher fidelity and part of KISA. It has to be tied directly into KISA and be part of KISA. So as I said earlier, like KISA 2.0 is still so brand new. So we've got to kind of let some of that play out
Fidelity.
too.
Fidelity is
But
key.
those state board outcomes are KISA, those 5. They're not school proven, which is the main thing that's been redone.
And I want to agree with you on your comment about the software being the stand-in for IPS. 100% not okay in my book.
Right, but that's what people kind of feel reduced to because they don't have the staff.
So like I said, we can have a bigger conversation about that one, I think.
You know, that pressure of all of that. So it's just, again, my heart in it is making sure what's coming from the state, that we're looking at every district and making sure it makes sense. And we're not forcing, because another program then is more money being spent on something that's not really helping. But Dr. Watson's correct, we're gonna have to move.
Well, as you transition, we'll come back, we'll be in small groups. Can I tell just a little story from dinner?
Of course.
So, a delightful family invited me to dinner, and you know I have no life, so I show up and eat whenever anyone does.
Especially during the week, right?
Young lady's getting ready to transition from high school in the Haas household and do something. And so I've had a little bit of work with her, not a lot. But during that, she mentioned her ACT and where she's now thinking about going to school. And I said, tell me that again, because last time we talked, you didn't even know if you were going to take this. But it was connecting with her now because she needed something where she was going to go, and now it was making connection. And she's just now starting to go from here to here, right? Just now, she's not there yet exactly, and she shouldn't be. But it's fun to watch her start to move from mom and dad on this dream to I'm figuring out what I want within the parameters. And the question becomes, how do you help districts get to that level without mandating?
Right,
It's really tough.
it is really tough.
You know, I mentioned to you, No Child Left Behind, when we went back to the core, Danny, people got rid of science, they got rid of social studies, they got rid of art, they got rid of recess, so that we could get a test score. So the goal was great, fantastic. We said IPS ought to be this robust discussion with a family. What happened? We put every kid on a computer. So I'm just telling you how schools reacted, which comes back to, you don't know how they're going, what they're going to do, but they react one way or another to either what you pull off or what you put on. And that's what the real burden is. I think, Debbie, you said it. Maybe we go to less, and then if we go to less and you get frustrated, well then your inclination will be to go to more. But if it's not implemented well, you'll go, That's
And
what
it's a
this
one
is so
size
tough.
fits all from our level, whereas you have so many different needs in these different districts. And then this is a good military saying, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. Going back to that kind of concept of, okay, here is this standard, you've got to do this. It's just a very basic, maybe crush down those expectations, but you have to meet these. You're not going to meet the grade. If you don't, we will let you fail. It's simple, it's structured, and it's high. And then let them meet that with their own ingenuity in their own ways, because what your districts do and what Betty's district does and what mine, we got more mixed. But you guys are kind of the extremes right there. They need to have that flexibility to be ingenious in their own ways to meet those standards. And
It's a community thing, obviously, in
Yeah.
rural areas.
You need a break.
Yeah, yeah. And I
So, restrooms,
just, yeah. Can I just say one more
Snacks.
thing before,
Yeah.
with the
So in front of you, you have this sheet. Amazing that you want to talk about KISA. Okay? So KISA is the vehicle by which you have a lot of power. And it comes through the accreditation of a school district. That is, and so most of your regulations, not all, because some come from law to reg, comes through here. And as you know, what we learned in KISA 1.0 was a couple things. District said, too much paperwork, too much busy work, you're asking us to report all the time, let us do the work. So Ben, Jay, Myron, that whole team went to work and started rolling out some concepts. And what's instructive about this is, Melanie said this is still a work in progress. Because the process is to roll out, yes, here's the plan, but the feedback cycle that we're getting in that plan will slightly alter. So we'll go through this in just a second. We have regional executives, 3 of them, and they meet with every school district at least every year, twice a year, I'm sorry, to get them ready for their school improvement day, where school districts have to come and then say, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going. So I'm gonna just walk you through this, just so that you know this, but I think that it's gonna, again, have your discussion around it. All the things you've been talking about, where do they go or where do they come out of this? Because this vehicle, this vessel, could be where you put it or where you take it out. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay? No, okay. Because this, okay, so all these things you've been talking about, some of you said simplify, simplify. You may want to pull things out of KISA, all right? You may want to put some things in or highlight some things, but the vehicle that school districts are going to look at as to what they have to do primarily is going to come in this vessel, okay, that we've been developing for years now.
And understand, this is the school improvement
Yes,
part
that's right.
of KISA.
Yeah.
This isn't the whole of KISA.
So what districts do right now is they choose one of these 4 that they want to work on. Structural literacy. How many times you guys have been talking about literacy? Standards alignment. Now here's a takeaway put in. I've heard Debbie say many times, shrink those standards, right? You have standards that you measure in only 4 curricular areas. You can name them. What are they? Math, English, language, arts, science, and social studies. You have what's called model standards for art and music and other things, but you don't measure it. There's no assessment, that's universal. But districts can take those and say, oh, this is what maybe we should teach. That all is here. It's all there. Including, if you want to know where would social emotional, if you got standards, okay, IPS, assessment, how often do you want to assess? What do you want to measure? Think of this as a measurement. If you take out the word assessment, think, how do we measure this? How do we know? And then finally, quality instruction. Okay? So districts choose one of those. They then go to a structure and say, I'm making this up, we're going to do structural literacy, and we're going to focus on professional learning, and what we're going to do is letters training. And that's our year 1 goal. And then guess what we're measuring against? You said you're going to choose reading. You said you're going to choose professional development, and you chose letters. We're measuring against, did you execute that plan? That's it. That's when Ben talks about being simple. We're measuring you against your plan. So, let me just walk you through this. This is, again, what Ben says from Poland, which is this coherence. The overload of too many initiatives.
Yes.
The sheer volume makes it impossible for people to manage in a way that gives depth. Here's the challenge that every single board meeting you're going to face. There will be multiple people from the legislature, from the public, want you to expand. it just will happen. And you'll look at that, I like that. That's the temptation. And that's the political cycle gets you on this too. Where, we don't like, right now, I kept telling all of you, wait till we figure out that math isn't any better than reading. And now that's starting to come out.
Yes, it
Right,
is.
well, let's forget about reading, let's jump to math. You gotta do it all. So, we like this, what Poland said. Next, so we're only gonna hold schools accountable for what we can support. All right, from the small to the big. Bigger or easier because they've got lots of staff, but we will improve instruction through conversation, collaboration, opposed to narrative reporting, tell us what you're doing. We're just gonna show us what you're doing. We'll focus on improving professional actions at school level that elevate those fundamentals and reinforce each other. We'll evaluate all school improvements efforts through the lens of our theory of action, and we promise to try to keep it simple. All right, so I'm going to go to this. Oops, it's that again. So here's where we're at right now. You adopted this as the model, and now remember, this is the roadmap. We're going to San Francisco, but we may decide to stop in a different place. We may alter our eating plans. This is a work in progress. So even though we've laid out a roadmap, in year one, the compliance part of this is you have to report to us what goal, what structure did you, what goal, or what fundamental, what structure did you do, and guess what we're going to evaluate you against?
But this is compliance.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yes. We're going to report, I'm sorry. So there's three areas here: compliance, school improvement, and outcomes. We're going to report the compliance and evaluate against compliance. We have hundreds of laws that have to be adhered to that were passed that we have to hold school districts in compliance to. Right? We're going to evaluate their action plan, talked about that. And the outcomes, the outcomes were simply reported. Here's the data. Okay? Next year, same thing here. You see that's consistent. Now we're measuring again, did you do what you said you were going to do this year? Did you train all your staff in letters, or are you in the process of doing it? If that's your, and the answer is no, there's some decisions to be made on accreditation pretty quickly. Because you haven't even said what you said you were going to do, you haven't done. Because we think if they do that, action literacy gets better. Does that make sense? Or they think that.
So
Yeah.
what does the local board, what do they play in this?
So all this has to be approved by their local board, Danny. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, so so we've already been through KISA 1.0, and this is what KISA 2.0, or is this KISA 3 now?
Oh, this is 2.
This is 2.0 still? Okay, so, because I know we've already been through the action plan into implementation in the other KISA. In KISA 1.0, we've been through implementation.
That's right.
But
Have we?
that's a completely different.
But what I'm saying is, why are we just starting all over again? Because it's almost like we've already gotten to the point of implementation. Why don't we just transition into KISA 2.0 and keep implementation? Because implementation is where we're holding the schools to that standard, right?
Yes.
So we're saying we've got a whole year here that we're not gonna hold them to any standard because there's no implementation. That's what I'm understanding this. Am
Okay.
I understanding it
So
right?
we had to take them back to simplify the goals, Debbie. They had too much stuff, and they weren't doing anything well. So the concept of this was, in year one, go back to your school improvement plan and tell us what you're going to do, and then we're measuring you against that next year.
But if we're getting simpler, they should still be able to implement it. I guess that's why I'm not understanding why we dropped the implementation.
We didn't drop it.
We
There's
didn't,
no implementation on
Right,
24,
because this
25.
entire school year has been about developing this.
that plan, they had to develop the plan.
Right, but I'm saying is they're simplifying. If you were developing a new plan that was more complex, it might be, you might have to have some time to implement that because it's become more complex. But we're actually simplifying it, so it seems if you go simpler, you shouldn't have to have a year to transition into implementation.
It's just a whole new system.
The reason for that is they were so complex before, they had 50 priorities, and they were writing all these narratives. And now we're saying, you gotta go focus. And so that, they didn't have that focus. That's what we're doing.
The first piece, it just did not provide that.
It allowed them to do everything at the same
And it was
time.
a 5-year cycle, so it just didn't do what this does.
Yeah. And then by year 3, then, you're evaluating now the outcomes. And the theory right now is whatever those become, you're gonna measure a static level and you're gonna measure growth toward those, okay? So, here's then, this side is what it looks like. And here's the decision then that you get to make. So, the school improvement model is that sheet in front of you. Thanks, Connie. I will say.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Okay? Each accreditation has a set standard to meet that they are choosing. That's the school improvement model. That's what they're doing right now. Student outcomes are right now, there's 5 in there that you've talked about, but there's really 3 that get measured. There's the academic, there's the graduation, there's post-secondary success. Okay? Those can be changed. You also have social emotional in there, kindergarten readiness, but those aren't being measured at the same level. And then you have this. And I'll give you an example. You approve every month professional development plans. How does that improve anything? So you may want to say, there's a law that forces us to have them. We're going to strip the regulations and just allow that to be local. That's your decision. But you may want to take a ton of this off their plate. You may want to modify this. This you've got going right now, and this is where you're headed in the next 2 years. And you have to decide, you can't change law, you can't change the laws, but you can change every regulation. Kathy?
I just wanted to throw out here, right here, where we're talking about that with the compliance and regulations. I and Beryl jumped on a NASB Zoom call a couple weeks ago. And 2 of this, it was a central states one, so it was like 6 or 7 states that are in the central thing.
Can I just say something because
Yes.
we're recording?
Yeah.
NASB
Oh,
is
yes.
your organization of state boards in other
The
states.
national.
It's not the National Association of School Boards, which are local boards
State boards.
association.
Yeah.
These are state boards, I'm sorry.
That's okay. And so 2 states talked about how they are streamlining regulations. Iowa and Nebraska have been and are going through the process. And I'm pretty sure it was the guy from Iowa that said, I think just for a visual effect, they had printed all of the regs. And it was a 12-inch stack of paper. And they had so far, they don't have it finalized, but it brought it down to 2 inches. So it was so cool because that's something, if you guys remember, not the new ones, remember I had asked for a report on everything that staff of schools have to do, whether it was by KSDE, us, or state law. And looking at.
Or federal.
Or federal, looking at all those things, and again, what can we look at and pull off? Because it takes away from, you know, that one thing you had up there, there's all these wonderful things and they can all make sense by themselves, but you throw all those together and it's just overwhelming and it's too much, and it takes away, it ends up taking away from. So, just as he was talking about compliance, that's something that really caught my eye because it's kind of been there in my brain for a while, but to see that 2 states out of like 6 or 7 were fully involved in that. So the next meeting is gonna be hearing from them exactly how they walked that out, but it was really interesting.
And what you said about professional development, of course, I
Yes.
print everything, and that,
Yeah,
And the
there's
question you have to ask is that a lever that you want to use to get to the outcome, what better math achievement? And if you say, as a board, it doesn't get us there,
right.
then, okay, then what does the law say that you have to do? And then how do you streamline that? And that's just one of hundreds of examples you're gonna have to work through.
Well, the thing that comes to mind for me is teacher morale. And we've been hearing a lot about how low teacher morale is. And constantly the complaint is you're putting more on us
Right.
and not taking anything away. So
Right.
I think, if nothing else, just to make that effort of yeah, we put some things on you, but we're willing to take away some things, would actually help their morale. So,
100%.
So, this is the process, that chart that you have in front of you. And this will be the measurement. And these will be the things that are just in law or regulation that you decide on. Okay, so here's the question in your small group. I'm gonna give you both, because I think you're gonna intermix these. It's around KISA. KISA 2.0 says successful rollout to schools. The first full year. Look at the concepts of KISA and discuss in your group why you believe that this rollout has been successful. Why do you think overall big, small districts have said, we generally like this? And that doesn't mean, I think Kathy said to me, you're not gonna find a one-off teacher or principal that complains. But you're hearing overall, we like this right now, okay? So why do you think that? What have you done so far that's resonated with the field? By the way, resonated with the legislature too,
Yes, it has.
okay? It seems to resonate with people that it's a good thing so far. You got to build it out over the next 2 or 3 years. Because the second question is, what concepts do you really like? Right? Why has it been such? What concepts do you really like about this that then we can replicate with these type of things, either by pulling out or putting in? We're not getting to establishing the goals today, but we're getting you to think about now the things that you think are important, either put in or pull out, because the next 2 years are where we got to go. Now, let me give you the first thing. You know, Beth's been meeting with you every month to talk about state assessments. This summer, a group of teachers are going to get together and set cut scores on those assessments. And they're going to bring those to you. And all these psychometric people are going to say, if you cut it here, here's what it means. If you cut it here, here's what it means. Right? You can put it high, medium, low. You know, I mean, where you put that, the time the board did it last, they put it really high. Okay? Maybe, well, say that, maybe too high. That's, you know, Nate says it's pretty spot on. But Nate also says there's only 6 states in our category. All right? But that'll be your first decision around these. And that's just the cut scores. Okay? So I'll try to always point that out to you, you know, when those things come up to you. So here's the 2 questions. Why do you think it's been successful so far? What's the components of this? And Kathy's been to how many school improvement days?
Just one, unfortunately.
Oh, but you've been to a lot of KISA
KSDE,
informational.
Yes.
Okay? Why do you think it's been
3 of them
successful?
in April.
And what concepts then do you think off of this
Facilitator
need
training.
to go in or out? Okay? Okay, small group discussion.
Okay. Hey, I'm gonna pull that.
Click and read while we're
There's a chair right there.
But I'm saying, this was freaking funny.
Exactly.
So I went to Smoky Hill. I didn't think they would bring it up. I've heard about it.
Yeah, I didn't like it any while we were talking to you. No, it was just throwing me because I know that everybody's like, oh, you know,
So I found.
I didn't see what else when we were doing the KISA shows. And then when they were talking about the problems of it, they said go to KISA shows. So I need to see all of those conversations. So for me to see that we're still not implementing it,
And this is worked out.
just see, did I miss you the thing, are we implementing it now this next year? Did they just say, well, we're not going to implement it last year?
So third time was the charm. It was worth it. It wasn't.
They had 5
No, it was super good. Having facilitators and the little ones.
And so then they have these schools
Because they want you to hover over it.
Yeah,
And it wasn't on the ground doing it. And so there was.
You kind of get the sense that it's not going to
It's sort of like, when I was a kid, you would, a patient came in with entire years so they could leave the hospital. You continually took vital signs and stuff. And you kept assessing the patient to see if they were. That's what I look at as people on the so there's a continual reporting of just the symptoms. Somebody else is the bunker controlling the behavior. Several things like that would how reporting happened and now.
That's why I wandered around to keep you
I
on
know,
topic.
because they were like, wait, we're
Well,
being
no, I
legit.
don't think it's fair to say it was a 5-year snapshot, it was over 5 years. Ben, I always call him Ben and Jerry, but Ben
Would you really like,
I got just called this.
You would say, because I think we can be executives that are, it could be a 4. It could be the same 5. What do you think is the latest, what would your opinion?
So, but I, whenever, I told people, oh, it's Ben and Jerry, and then they would just say, what's the related content, and they were on the road a lot together, and going to all those schools, and so even though they were on a 5-year plan, they were still in 1 year. Because, I mean, they were continually going out to all those schools,
Yeah,
rotating.
you remember last year was a year.
what I heard during this whole meeting, so I did not participate.
Because they were transitioning.
Yeah, that is, what did they call these,
Yes.
last year it was like
The one
late
place
year.
that they-
I can't remember some of them.
Posture.
That's what I guess I was getting at, is I was like, I already thought that we had the transition time, shouldn't have, maybe I read the years wrong, are we implementing this coming year?
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm misreading it, because I thought you said that we were not implementing it this year, and I was like, oh my
Well, we are,
God.
we're measuring the implementation as we get to the fall. They're implementing
So
it.
it,
My fault.
no, I was reading the wrong years, because I was like, that doesn't make sense to me, that we've been this whole time like transitioning. I was like, let's implement, because again, it comes to, and I'm maybe a little nervous when you said it's not simple, because I don't want to dumb it down. I want it to be high standards,
Yes.
but compact, and I guarantee that I want schools to know, local school boards, because what we need to do is wake up local school boards, because I think, I ran on the county districts, and I think the way to empower parents is to empower those local school boards, okay, to be involved. They need to be choosing.
Let me ask you.
How many are not?
But that's, what you said, but
Oh, their job is for sure, but they're the driver, but they're like, you know, I mean, at least half of them are asleep at the wheel, and so putting this in their lap, and then saying, hey, you don't wake up and school will lose its funding, all of a sudden now the local school board has a reason to wake up, instead of,
which is absolutely.
yeah, and they need to, because they need to, the idea that we have to have legislation in order for constituents to even have their own number. Or their.
You know what, get some groups for me.
Oh, no, shame on us, because we should hold that local board accountable. We have general supervision of that. We have general, but here's where the key comes in. If we're not making sure that the local school boards, we can feel right, that's on us. That's not, and I tell people, I said, you realize our constitution was written in 1861. So I say, do you know how to teach them? We've been here for 90 years away from being subjects anymore. I say, our whole education system is set up like that. And I don't know if you've ever heard me say this, down to now. And I say, because I said, even the wording, I said, because guess what, the legislature, they are the provider. When you think of a home, what do you think of the provider? The one negative, the husband heads the household, bringing in the dough, right? The woman of the house is us. The general supervision of the estate is under the women. If you know what, if things are dirty in the kitchen, if dinner's not on the table, if the grass is growing under your kneecaps,
the woman should be noticing this and making sure the staff is fixing it. That's what we should be doing with the local school board, saying, you're letting that grass grow too tall, you're letting the kitchen get dirty, you're not doing your job. Now telling them how to do that is not our job. But telling them that they need to do it is our general supervision.
This is just part of our
But I think the formulation, maybe the culture they're saying, our school district, it was simple thing is.
Actually, Vince got very creative.
Did you see it when it's reading?
And I was there when they were speaking, so they kept it out.
Becoming
Well,
I do, because then they're on our team, they're in team with us. They should be though, they should be though. I tell you what, mine are getting more and more because as I'm talking to them, I'm telling you, you can call me.
You need that validation point of, like you just, that's going to help. It's going to be something that you can do.
No, they're asleep, they need to be woken up. Well, they're trying to turn it over to their superintendent. A lot of them are, but you know what, the parents aren't happy with that. I tell you what, no, that's what I, in my district, I am, if I have to, I will talk to the superintendent, but for the most part, I'll talk to Dr. Potts, he'll talk to the superintendent, I won't talk to he said, I will talk to the local school board, if I think I will go to the school board, if I think Dr. Potts is going to talk to the superintendent, because I am trying to force them to wake up.
okay, well, that's a weird question, because I look at this, I look
I don't know, I'm a little fuzzy. But what I was trying to say is
what we, how we would like to see them successful. And so when I go to the university, I make a point with the superintendent to sit in their office. And we have, I try to have a discussion, and I'm not very good at this, but I try to have a discussion on what is it that you are really doing that you're really proud of, and then what is it that you see as deficit or something, you know, if there's something that we I wanna know who that person is.
I don't. I want to know the local school board.
You've seen me though, I need all the help I can get.
We have the same constituents.
So they need to.
Well, she invited me over to dinner. So we did, yeah, she said,
But they don't have Republican Democrats. They don't, you know, they're just saying, well, I'm getting on the local school board because I'm selling insurance and and my kids on the track team. And I But what I'm saying is I'm having good feedback. I'm giving them the same.
you talk about curriculum, you talk about as far as teaching.
I agree,
So
but.
that changes, and that changes.
But that means that I will tell you, I'm getting really great feedback. You have great feedback because, like, you guys probably don't realize, but we just did that last one, they had a 4-3 vote. And so I emailed them all, and I said, hey, I'm so sorry, because we also had all press releases coming out. I said, I'm sorry, I'm late, sending this out to you. I said, this is the way I think that's what's going, because I tell you what, your voting pattern tells me you don't want that box. And I said, if you have a I know that superintendent's doing this because they all do. I said, I expect you do not want that box.
And so I said, what do you want me to do? And they didn't get back to me until after, and then I had to apologize to them because I forgot to pull it off the consent agenda because we were shuffling everything around. I said, my bad, but I had.
You don't have to put it here. Can someone jot down some notes to give to Deborah?
Just thank
So
you
that
for
when we
reaching
can
out.
back, we can at least capture some of this, so we don't,
And
we
I
don't know what
said,
happened.
and I said, I won't talk to your superintendent because I don't want the superintendent to write your That's exactly right. But see, but you get told that you're supposed to, and I'm like, they don't work for me. I don't work for them.
So, if someone could just jot down some notes of what we can do, it doesn't have to be, I have to be on close to it, that's the way to
I don't know if we're on subject.
Well, we were, that's why the teacher wanted, that's why the teacher wanted.
Okay, here's, we kind of are on subject. What we're saying is we would, if I were to interpret what I was saying, I would like to see this accountability through the school board, not through the superintendents. I don't want this to be given to me through the superintendents. I want the local school board to know this is how your school is graded. And because if they lose, informed of their school
Moving towards school, they can do this, come up with positive outcomes. So that pass the piece.
I do think that if they were more informed, like if you were in the school board, and you were told, hey, you're representing your business, all of a sudden now, don't you feel what they say, okay, superintendent, what do we need to do in this area? Because that problem's been given to us, not just the superintendent telling them not to be a superintendent about it. He's got it.
So you're most interested.
I did that question.
Are you still in school? How far along? Oh, okay. So you graduate in the fall?
Yeah.
Congratulations. A lot of hard work. And is it straight up, what is it, computer science straight up? So she, emphasis on any particular area?
Ben is going to talk to you. Ben, the staff is going to talk to you. They're going to talk
On just the production side, not the coding side.
I really think sending a representative from their school board, if they need to, let's see their family, and that superintendent would normally be invited up to give a report. How is that doing that stuff when we're giving them award? The superintendent up here, we should be calling the school board because it's a local school board, it's maintains the controls of school. They hired that superintendent. And then, he gets his recognition we need to focus on. Oh, yeah. Right. I've sat in on That's okay, we had a Wednesday night. Does anybody want there? I'm not looking at it.
2 minutes. 2 minutes left in your small group discussion.
Yeah, like, I see that. Helmet pink.
That's the main thing, I'm gonna teach you that.
You want to, when you tell the superintendent, you get your ankle in touch with any, you want to talk to me about something, you don't want to be in touch with me. Now, I'll go into, principal for a day, and they see the schools and stuff like that. But honestly, I get to the point that if I get invited for a principal for the day, I want to explain to the school or not the district to attend with me. For 3 of them, messages, left messages. I call them information. None, there's none. I've already,
I know.
I outlined just very clearly, and but see, you haven't asked it. I don't know why. I think
1 minute.
I was.
1 minute.
Don't care about it. And that was me, because it was a superintendent thing. I was like, and he was Kathy. You have a superintendent? I said, no, I don't. I mean, I met him up here, and then he came up to speak. I'm not interested. I don't even know if they're in my district. He may not even live in my district. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes they come from out. Yeah, they transition. They come from Leavenworth over to us, and then they go back. No, we haven't, because what we're saying is that we want this structure to be reported through the board to us.
You just got elected to.
And through our staff.
Oh, you're up next year.
But I want this reported to go back in, so when Ben comes back to us and he wants to talk to the superintendent and says, we're failing on this, and that, I want us on our letterhead to send to their board a report of what their school is doing from us.
Okay, I'm gonna bring you back together. So, when you plan our, from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, if you think about being a teacher, you overplan, and you don't get to where you wanna go, and that's fine, because the students have to take you where you need to go. And we didn't get back to the large group, right, to have this discussion. So that's, you know what, that's necessary though, because at this stage, if we don't get all those things out, we can't ever start to narrow what we have. If, whatever notes you took on that, if we can give to Deborah, and I'll give these to Deborah, and I'm taking 2 minutes.
Have fun with that.
Yeah, so I just wanna tell you kind of where we're gonna start in May. The idea of starting to pull this together. I'm gonna use this a lot to ask you, are we in the right force? Not if we're working hard. Are we in the right force?
Right.
And right now, you all have a little bit, you have more in common than you do different, but the differences are still coming out, and that's okay. You don't ever wanna lose those. We wanna figure out as we narrow what we have in common. That's gonna be the key. So that we can then be simple to the school districts. Next, we'll start with the KISA, very briefly in small group, we'll move to large. And then I'm going to start laying out for you what the Supreme Court said in the Gannon decision, that is your function. And we're going to talk about licensure, accredited, the bullseye of what the Supreme Court has said. Not that you don't have other authority, but what really is your authority. And then we will start then to actually work on these broad concepts of goals. You'll make no decision in May. I then with Kathy and Danny will take all this together and I'll start to think about, you'll get the goals again from the past, and you'll see that I'll try to put in some measurable things we can measure based upon the chunks that I think you're getting to. And then you can say, it's not what I thought we were doing, it is what I thought, I want to tweak it a little bit. Somewhere in the early summer, then you'll vote, and once you do that, that will be our primary focus, and I will be trying to bring you back to that focus from now until the end of December of 26. In January 27, you're gonna have a new board. Yeah, 5 people are up for election, and my guess is some will run. And I said this to Kathy, it's 2 years goes by fast, you know, and so you gotta get this right. Yeah, it goes by fast. And all through this, the political environment at the federal level is gonna go up and down on you. The state is gonna go up and down. It's gonna pull you in a lot of conversations. We'll have some of those tomorrow. You know, what's gonna happen with Title I funding. I think, you know, Burl brought that up. All of those have to be dealt with. But your focus, it reminds me of the old Stephen Covey. What's urgent, what's important.
Right.
Urgent always wins. And sometimes you gotta be an urgent. Sometimes we create urgent. And we gotta know the difference. So, yeah, Debbie.
There was something I read that I was surprised by. Apparently, the Department of Education came down with a letter that has to be signed by all the
This
districts.
is what I missed. How
That is
did I miss
correct.
that?
We'll
So-
discuss it tomorrow.
Is it on the agenda?
Yeah,
Because
it's
I didn't,
it's
I
the
didn't know. if
legislative priorities.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the agenda
Okay.
came out, I thought before that letter came out, and I just
It
happened.
is in the legislative.
It's in the legislative part.
Updates.
And a letter came out again today on the same subject, extending the first letter. This is part of the churn that we're in right now in trying to figure this out. And districts should panic. I was on the phone with Wichita, Betty, before we started. I was on the phone with Dodge City saying, I don't know that we can sign this. What are you making me sign? Scott will go over.
I do
Mark and
think
Scott
that we
will go
need
over.
more, I mean, things are happening hard, they're happening fast, they're happening different way. I mean, we're having lots, and I do think that we need to implement those Zoom, special meetings, because this whole board needs to be informed.
Yeah, that's what we're.
And so, you know, when deadlines are happening and like, so that we're not reacting so much as acting on these things, because that's already,
But at the same time, like
Half a
you
weekend
said, we had
away.
one letter, and then what, 24 hours later, we've got a second letter, or 48 hours.
About 48 hours. We've got a second
So
letter
it's hard
amending
to
the
tell
first
when
I'd say the
everything's
first one's the
flip-flopping.
third, so I don't know what today is.
Yeah. So,
I
yeah,
think it's difficult.
so that's
to try to-
tomorrow.
It's 4 days later.
that's tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay.
You know, I always used to tell the kids that I taught and coached, my expectation is you come, you're on task, you play full out. And I think you played full out today. And so much so that if I don't let you go, you're gonna be exhausted by the time we get to day 3. So, you know, so whatever you need to do to rejuvenate the batteries tonight. But again, I hope you kind of see where we're headed, and we want to make sure your voice is included in that, where you want to go. So, Kathy, Danny, anything as we wrap up?
Don't forget to be early in the morning for your new badges.
Yeah.
Get your picture taken, so it'll get all fluffed up.
And I might say this, Jim is not gonna be able to be with us in May because Charlene has her other knee replaced. So we're gonna have to get him caught up to speed, ask all of you to do that, and I'm not sure about Michelle, but we're gonna want their voices in the final document. So,
And if you don't have his email, I'll be sure.
Will you be zooming in?
I think it's right around the surgery time.
Oh.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, have a good evening.